Hello, and thank you for buying my tutorial on creating a stylized wood texture using Maya, ZBrush, 3D Code, and Photoshop. In this video, I'll be showing you how to prepare your tiling texture in a modeling program. I will show you how you can easily sculpt wooden details onto your planks in ZBrush. We will be baking and compositing our layers together. And finally paint our textures using Photoshop and 3D Code. And lastly, we're going to have a look at the PBR options. We have to improve the look of our stylized textures. So let's get started. In order to start, I have already set up a Maya scene with a very simple square on the floor. It consists of two parts, the blue and the gray part, and these are just combined but not merged at the vertices, so that later in ZBrush I can separate these and only tile my texture over the blue part. Next, I'm going to set up my grid so that I can more easily snap the planks that I'm about to model. So I basically went for a little more divisions here so that when I start bringing in these cubes, that I can snap them and make planks using the width of some of the grid lines, like you can see here. So some of these planks will be 2 grid pieces wide, some of them will be a little bit bigger, but it's just easier to make a tile if you snap it to the grid. Okay, now that I have my first plank laid out, I'm just copying this one and I'm going to fill out the entirety of the blue space. And I'm going to snap these together so that I will cover the whole inner square. And what I'm doing here already is I'm playing around with the size so that not all of the planks, of course, are the same length. Okay, as you can see, I filled almost the entire square with the planks, but I still want to get some variation into the width of the planks so that they're all not the same size. So what I do first, I scale them up to fill the entirety of the square, so I don't have to make that many planks for my tiling texture. And then I'll take some rows and I'm going to be changing the width. So in the end, I will end up with something like this. Different rows of planks with different sizes. To help me later in the texturing process, I'm also going to change the height of some of these planks so that later if we going to bake a height map, we can use this to get some color variation into individual planks. Okay, last thing I do is I'll take some of these rows and move them around so that we don't have a perfectly straight edge and the tiling will be less obvious. Here I'm just doing a quick test how this could be looking in Maya untextured, if there are any major errors or not. I'm just copying this around a few times. And as you can see, of course it tiles, and also the variation in the height, the length and the width makes it a bit harder to see that it's a tiling texture, which is good. Now I'm just going to take the whole thing, our planks and our ground plane, and we're going to export this as an OBJ so we can import it into ZBrush. So as you can see, I've already imported my models into ZBrush, and now I'm going into the Polygroups tab and I'm going to auto group this piece so that I can separate the pieces a bit easier and then in the end merge all the pieces I want together. So at the moment everything is one subtool and I'm going to split this up into separate ones, and then I'm going to combine all the wooden pieces into one subtool. so that in the end I'm left with only two subtools, one for the wood and one for the background plane. Now we're going to Dynamesh our wooden planks so that we have an even topology on all of these so that we can sculpt better and evenly, and to add the exact amount of detail to every piece. So I'm just going to hit Dynamesh with the group settings on so that the pieces themselves are separated but are all Dynamesh. You can isolate these by shift and left clicking these, and then you have only one on the screen depending on the polygroups you set up earlier. Okay, we're going to increase the subdivisions now by hitting Control D, and we're going up to about 1 million, which should be enough for a few planks that we're going to sculpt. And I'm going to sculpt by starting to use the Trim Dynamic brush and applying a square alpha to this. So with this one, we're going to chip away some of the edges and give some more damage to the wood. And as you can see, I'm taking a small size and then I'm going to just start sculpting away on the edges, and I'm making use of the pen pressure, so I'm not always hitting the tablet with the same force, so that I have varied strokes on the edge of my mesh. Also, I'm varying the amount of damage. Some of the edges, especially the corners, I'm taking away more, and for some of the longer pieces I'm being a bit more careful, just to have some variation in there, some bigger and some smaller damages. So I'm going to repeat this process for all of the planks. We made quite a few, so I'm going to sculpt each of these individually. If you, of course, want to use less planks, you should have a different base model that you've made in your modeling program, but I'm just going to, for the sake of it, show you this on a few of these, and I'm going to speed this up a little so that you can follow along, and then ultimately sculpt your own ones. Okay, make sure you play around with the intensity of your stroke and the size of your brush and the amount of pieces you chip away to give this random look to the texture so that not every piece looks the same, that there's some damage on it, and that makes it less obvious that it's a tiling texture, which is the goal for what we're doing here. Next, we're going to work on the big cracks that we have in most of the wooden planks, which are giving the wood a very stylized look. And there are two options you can use. By default, ZBrush comes with the Dam Standard brush, which is pretty good for creating very deep cracks into models, but the fall off is quite soft, which works, but is not quite what we want for this very stylized look. So you can go ahead onto the internet and download the Orbs crack brush. There are various sources where you can get it from for free. And we use this one to create the stylized look we want. As you can see, the fall off is a bit harder than what we have with the DEM standard. So I'll be using the Ops brush, which is very prominent with the people who sculpt. Also, we're going into our brush settings and we're going to turn on the lazy mouse option, which makes it a bit easier for us to draw straight lines. So we don't have to worry about too much to keep our pen steady. The lazy mouse takes some work off of us. We can see the brush follows the red line and you can manipulate the direction as you go down, and it turns out to be a much more straighter line than you would do by not using the lazy mouse. So this saves us time. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to only take 2 or 3 of these very straight lines down each piece of wood, and as you can see, I'm playing around again with the size of our stroke. So what I do on the tablet, I switch around the intensity by pushing harder or not on the tablet, which gives us some very nice shape variation on the cracks. You can connect them, you can find out shapes that you like, but I'd like to keep it simple for this one so that I don't create too much visual noise by making some very weird shapes that might not fit into our scene. And the ends, I'm giving some extra care by making sure they go over the edge and they don't stop before the plank ends. And this process we're going to repeat for the entire model. And I'm going to speed this up now again. This is already a very good base for any wood texture you would make. You can stop here, you can take this and already paint this, but I'm going to add some more detail to this, which is going to be nice in the bake for the normal maps and the ambient occlusion maps. So I'm basically doing the same thing again by taking a much smaller brush now, and I'm going in between the bigger cracks that I've made before and add some more surface detail in there by using the same technique, varying the size of the brush and the intensity of the stroke. I'm also playing around with the length of the stroke, so not every stroke has to go from top to bottom. You can really see and work what works for you and play around a little with what you're doing. It's really the same principle like before, it's just a little more to add some more detail, so I'm going to speed this up again now. This now looks like some pretty old stylized wood now, and the last thing that we are going to do is we're putting a few more dents in there by just using the standard brush, and we're going to invert it by holding Alt, and we are going to just put in some of these dots across the boards just to give this some more stylized look to it and to maybe relax the eye a little on all these stripes that we added to draw some attention and to have some more varied shapes in there, which makes it a bit more interesting to look at in my opinion. After this, we're pretty much done with the wood, and the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to append a sphere out of which we're making a few metal bolts that hold the planks down to the ground, and to introduce another material to our workflow. So I'm making this very, very small, and I'm going to be placing this right on top of one of those planks to see how big I have to make this one. And I'm removing the lower part of the bolt because we don't need it, and to save some performance basically. You don't have to do this if you have a powerful machine. Once I'm happy with the positioning, I'm going to take our trim dynamic brush again, this time without an alpha, and I'm going to sculpt some of the top away to give it a more metal look. So I'm just trimming away some of the smoothness of the sphere. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start duplicating the subtool around and fit it into the individual planks. Just like this. Keep in mind that some of the planks are at a different height, so you also have to tweak the height of the individual bolts. Once you're happy with your placement, you can merge all the bolt subtools into one. And as you can see, I didn't give all the planks two bolts. Some of them I only have one or none of those. Now, as this is one subtool, you can go back in and maybe do some fine tuning on some of these bolts in case they're not at the right position, and to give them some variety because we copied them around so they all look the same. But you can also skip this step because they're quite small and you probably won't see it in the end. The last thing I'm doing for sculpting is to go back to the wood and go back to my ops brush or DEM standard brush, take away the lazy mouse and just create an insertion where the bolts are located. Just make a little circle around them to give the idea someone placed it there. Once that is done, I merge the wood and the bolt pieces together into one subtool. Now that we're done with the sculpting, we need to make our piece tileable, and I do that by duplicating the original subtool and go into the offset options and deform this piece by moving it away 400 units, which should then tile perfectly into all directions. So I do the same thing again in the opposite direction, so that we have 3 tiling pieces. Then I merge these 3 together. Now I'm taking the whole group, duplicate this one, and I'm going to change the setting in my offset. So instead of going into the X direction, I'm into the Z direction, and do this 2 times again in both directions so that I have 9 tiling pieces that tile over the center square we have created in the very beginning. Now we can all merge these 3 together. And we can export the wood pieces as our high poly model. Now that we saved this, we're going to take the document and decrease the size to our texture size, which is for now 1K, so 124 by 124. And we're going to zoom out so that the entire square is visible in our ZBrush scene. Okay, now we have to make sure that we're looking at our model from the top-down view, so maybe turning on the grid helps, so you can align the model to the grid, and we're going to focus only on the square we've created in the beginning. So we're going to look at this from the top view, and we also have to turn off the perspective. Now we have to isolate the inner square and press F to frame the entire scene onto that square. And then if we reveal the wood again, you can see tiles over this square, and this is the square that we're going to render out. Then in the render settings, we're going to turn off the shadows and turn on the ambient occlusion. And then we're going to render out a few passes. We're going to start with the red pass, hit the render button. Then from this render, we can go into the render passes and get the red shaded, the depth map, and the AO map. And we can also take the mask. Then we can go into the properties and turn off the ambient occlusion because we don't need it anymore. And we're going to bake up a few more. For example, the white matte cap. And for these, we only need the shaded version, so you only have to save one of these.